German intelligence misjudged the US Navy, until Midway proved otherwise. A German intelligence officer sits in Berlin in early June 1942, reading reports about a massive naval battle near a tiny island called Midway. He reads the numbers once, then twice, then a third time because they can't possibly be correct. The report states that Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. 4 fleet carriers, the core of Japanese naval power, are gone and sunk by the American Navy, which German intelligence had written off as defeated 6 months ago after Pearl Harbor. The officer reaches for a file, the one that contains German naval intelligence's assessment of American capabilities. Every conclusion in that file is now proven catastrophically wrong. The Americans weren't beaten. They weren't demoralized. They weren't inferior. They were hunting. And at Midway, they'd just proven that German intelligence had completely misjudged the US Navy's strength, resilience, and capability. This is the story of how one of the most pivotal battles in history shattered German assumptions and altered the entire Axis's view of American naval power. Let's start by understanding what German intelligence actually thought about the American Navy before Pearl Harbor and in the months immediately after. The German Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, had a complex relationship with its assessment of American naval power. On one hand, they knew America had industrial capacity. They knew America could build ships. They fundamentally misunderstood what kind of navy America had and what it could become. German naval intelligence examined the pre-war US Navy and saw a fleet designed for a different type of warfare. American battleships were powerful but slow. American naval doctrine seemed outdated. The Americans hadn't fought a major maritime war since the Spanish-American War in 1898, and that was against a weak opponent. Germany had recent experience. They'd fought in World War I. They understood modern naval warfare, or at least they thought they did. The German assessment was that America had potential, but it would take years for that potential to materialize. American shipyards could build vessels, but training crews, developing tactics, and gaining combat experience, all of that took time. Germany believed a window of perhaps 3 to 5 years during which America would be building up, but not yet combat effective. During that window, Germany and Japan could secure their positions and create defensive perimeters that would be too costly for America to break. This assessment was based on reasonable assumptions, but it was fundamentally flawed in ways German intelligence didn't understand. Then Pearl Harbor happened, December 7, 1941. Japan launched a surprise attack that crippled the US Pacific Fleet. 8 battleships were damaged or destroyed. Over 2,400 Americans were killed. Dozens of aircraft were destroyed on the ground. German intelligence received reports of the attack, and their assessment seemed confirmed. The Americans were caught completely by surprise. Their vaunted Pacific Fleet was smashed. Japan had achieved naval dominance in the Pacific in a single morning. German analysts updated their estimates. America would need even longer to recover now. Maybe 5 to 7 years before they could seriously challenge Axis naval power. What German intelligence missed was crucial. Yes, the battleships were hit hard, but the American aircraft carriers weren't at Pearl Harbor that day. They were at sea on various missions. This accident of timing would prove decisive. The carriers survived, and they became the foundation for American naval operations in the Pacific. German intelligence noted this, but didn't fully appreciate its significance. They still thought in terms of battleship warfare. Carriers were important, but battleships were the core of naval power. This was the old way of thinking, and it was about to become obsolete. In the months after Pearl Harbor, German intelligence tracked American movements in the Pacific with interest, but not alarm. The Americans were clearly reeling. Japan was rampaging across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. American forces were retreating in the Philippines. Wake Island fell. Guam fell. Japanese victories were coming quickly and in rapid succession. German analysts saw this as confirmation of their assessment. The Americans were unable to stop the Japanese advance. They were on their back foot, defensive, probably demoralized. This fit perfectly with Nazi ideology that portrayed Americans as soft and incapable of sustaining a long war. But there were signs German intelligence should have caught. In April 1942, the Doolittle raid happened. American bombers launched from carriers and hit Tokyo. The physical damage was minimal, but the strategic implications were enormous. German analysts received reports of this raid, and most dismissed it as a propaganda stunt, a desperate attempt by America to score a morale victory when they couldn't win actual battles. What they missed was what the raid revealed about American capabilities. American carriers could operate deep in hostile waters. American crews had the skill to execute complex operations. American leadership was willing to take aggressive offensive action even when strategically on the defensive. These were all warning signs that the Americans were more dangerous than German intelligence believed. German naval intelligence also failed to understand American industrial capacity in practical terms. They knew American factories could produce ships. The numbers were in their reports, but they didn't fully grasp the speed and scale of American shipbuilding. They didn't understand that America was about to revolutionize naval construction with mass production techniques. They didn't anticipate that American shipyards would start launching escort carriers, destroyers, and other vessels at rates that seemed impossible by European standards. The industrial analysis was there on paper, but the implications weren't fully understood. Another crucial misunderstanding was about American naval doctrine and adaptability. German intelligence assumed the US Navy would fight in the same manner as it had trained before the war. Battleship-centric warfare, linear tactics, predictable strategies. What they didn't account for was American flexibility and willingness to adapt. The US Navy was learning fast from early battles. They were developing new tactics for carrier warfare. They were creating doctrines for submarine operations. They were innovating in ways that German intelligence didn't predict, because European navies were more traditional and rigid. Now, let's get to Midway, because this is where all of German intelligence's wrong assumptions came crashing down at once. The Battle of Midway happened in early June 1942, just 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Japanese Admiral Yamamoto planned an operation to lure out and destroy what remained of the American carrier fleet. He'd bring overwhelming force to Midway, a small atoll that was strategically important. The Americans would have to respond, and when they did, Japanese carriers would destroy them. It was supposed to be the decisive battle that would break American naval power in the Pacific for years to come. German intelligence was aware of Japanese planning for a major operation. They knew Japan was concentrating forces for something big. The expectation in Berlin was that this operation would be another Japanese victory, probably a decisive one. The Americans were still recovering from Pearl Harbor. They were outnumbered. They'd been losing consistently for months. Japanese naval aviation was experienced and skilled. Everything pointed to a Japanese victory that would cement their control of the Pacific. German planners were already thinking about how to coordinate with Japan once the Americans were pushed back to Hawaii or even the West Coast. But the Americans had an ace that neither German nor Japanese intelligence knew about. American cryptographers had broken Japanese naval codes. Not completely, but enough to give American commanders a crucial advantage. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the U.S. Pacific Fleet, knew the Japanese were coming to Midway. He knew roughly when they'd arrive, and with what forces. This allowed him to position his carriers for an ambush. The Japanese thought they were the hunters. They were actually the prey. The battle began on June 4, 1942. Japanese carriers launched strikes against Midway Island while American carriers maneuvered into position. The first American attacks were disasters. Torpedo bombers went in without fighter escort and were slaughtered by Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire. The casualties were horrific. It looked like it was going to be another Japanese victory. But then American dive bombers arrived over the Japanese fleet at the perfect moment. The Japanese carriers had their decks full of armed and fueled aircraft, preparing for another strike. They were maximally vulnerable. The American dive bombers, SBD Dauntlesses, rolled in and dropped their bombs with devastating accuracy. Within minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were burning wrecks. A few hours later, the 4th carrier, Hiryu, was also hit and fatally damaged. In one day, Japan lost 4 of its 6 fleet carriers. These weren't just ships. They were the core of Japanese naval air power. They represented years of construction and training. The pilots and aircrew killed were irreplaceable veterans with years of combat experience. It was a catastrophic defeat that Japan would never fully recover from. When news of Midway reached Berlin, German naval intelligence had to reassess its understanding of the US Navy completely. How did the Americans, supposedly beaten and demoralized, inflict such a devastating defeat on the Japanese Navy that had dominated the Pacific for 6 months? The answers were uncomfortable for German analysts. First, American intelligence was better than anyone had given them credit for. The ability to read Japanese codes gave Americans a decisive advantage. Second, American carrier doctrine and tactics were more effective than expected. The dive bomber attacks that won the Battle of Midway were executed with skill and courage. Third, American industrial capacity enabled them to replace losses faster than anyone anticipated. German intelligence reports from mid-1942 onward show a dramatic shift in tone. The dismissive attitude toward American naval capabilities disappeared. Reports started acknowledging that the US Navy was a serious threat. Analyses began factoring in American shipbuilding rates, and the implications were disturbing. America was building Essex-class carriers that were larger and more capable than anything Japan or Germany could produce. They were building them fast. The first Essex-class carrier was commissioned in late 1942, less than a year after Pearl Harbor. More were coming. German analysts realized that by 1943 or 1944, America would have overwhelming naval superiority. However, the damage to German strategic thinking went beyond just naval assessments. Midway forced German leadership to reconsider their entire understanding of American military capability. If the Americans could come back from Pearl Harbor that quickly, if they could defeat Japan's best carriers in a straight fight, what did that mean for the war in Europe? Germany was already struggling against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. Now they had to contemplate a revitalized and dangerous American military that could potentially intervene in Europe with real effectiveness. The psychological impact was significant too. German propaganda had spent months telling the German people and military that America was weak, divided, and incapable of effective military action. Midway made that propaganda look foolish. German soldiers and officers who paid attention to Pacific War developments started to worry. If the Americans could do that to the Japanese Navy, what would they do to the German military if they got the chance? This undermined morale in subtle but important ways. German naval cooperation with Japan also changed after the Battle of Midway. Before the battle, there was talk of coordinating operations, maybe German submarines operating with Japanese forces, maybe sharing technology and intelligence more freely. After Midway, German naval leadership realized that Japan might not be the dominant Pacific power everyone had assumed. This made cooperation less attractive and less strategically relevant. Germany had its own problems in the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Sending resources to help Japan seemed less worthwhile if Japan might lose anyway. Let's talk about what Midway actually revealed about American naval capabilities that German intelligence had missed or underestimated. First, American signals intelligence was of world-class quality. The ability to break Japanese codes and use that information effectively was a major advantage that German intelligence hadn't anticipated. Germany had its own Enigma cipher machine, which it believed was unbreakable. The idea that Americans could break complex codes and use that information operationally was disturbing. It raised questions about whether German codes were as secure as they thought. Second, American naval aviation was highly effective. The dive bomber pilots who sank the Japanese carriers at Midway showed skill, courage, and tactical understanding. German intelligence had assumed American aviators were inexperienced and would need years to match Japanese or German skill levels. Midway proved that American training programs were producing capable pilots faster than expected. The quality of American naval aircraft was also better than German intelligence had estimated. The SBD Dauntless dive bomber was a rugged, accurate, and effective aircraft. American fighters, such as the F-4F Wildcat, were holding their own against Japanese Zeros despite being theoretically inferior. Third, American logistics and damage control capabilities were exceptional. The carrier Yorktown had been badly damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea in early May. She limped back to Pearl Harbor with damage that should have taken months to repair. American shipyard workers repaired her in just 3 days. 3 days. She made it to Midway and participated in the battle before being sunk by Japanese forces. That kind of rapid repair work indicated that American logistics and industrial capabilities were far more advanced than what German intelligence had estimated. Fourth, American command and control was flexible and effective. Admiral Nimitz made bold decisions based on intelligence. He risked his career on what could have been a trap. American commanders at Midway adapted to changing circumstances. When initial attacks failed, they adjusted tactics. When opportunities appeared, they exploited them aggressively. This operational flexibility was something German intelligence had not expected from a navy they viewed as doctrinaire and rigid. Fifth, American resilience and fighting spirit proved to be much stronger than predicted. German intelligence and Nazi ideology had portrayed Americans as soft, unwilling to take casualties, likely to quit when things got hard. The torpedo bomber squadrons that attacked at Midway were almost completely wiped out. They knew it was a suicide mission, and they went anyway. That kind of courage and dedication didn't fit the German narrative about American weakness. It suggested that in a long war, Americans would be much tougher opponents than Germany had hoped. The strategic implications of Midway extended far beyond the Pacific. Germany was planning Operation Blue, the summer offensive in the Soviet Union aimed at capturing the oil fields of the Caucasus. Part of the strategic calculation was that America would be tied down in the Pacific, dealing with Japan for years to come. Midway changed that calculation. If America could defeat Japan's carriers, it might be able to stabilize the Pacific faster than expected. That could free up resources for the European Union. Germany may face American intervention sooner and with greater force than planned. German intelligence also had to reassess Japan's capabilities following the Battle of Midway. Japan had been portrayed as an unstoppable force in Asia and the Pacific. They destroyed the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. They'd humiliated British troops in Singapore and Malaya. They'd swept across Southeast Asia with ease. However, Midway demonstrated that Japan could be defeated decisively. If the Americans could sink 4 carriers in a day, what did that mean for Japan's ability to sustain a long war? German analysts began to scrutinize Japanese industrial capacity, training pipelines, and strategic planning more critically. The conclusion was troubling. Japan probably couldn't win a long war of attrition against America. And if Japan was going to lose eventually, what did that mean for Germany? There was also a technological dimension to German intelligence reassessment after Midway. American radar technology proved crucial in the battle. American ships had superior radar to Japanese ships, providing them with advantages in detection and fire control. German intelligence was aware of radar. They had their own versions, but they hadn't realized how far American radar technology had advanced. This suggested that American technological development was more advanced than expected across multiple domains. If Americans were ahead in radar, what about other technologies? Proximity fuses, sonar, code-breaking machines. The implications were concerning. The battle also revealed American coordination capabilities. The three American carriers at Midway Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown operated as a coordinated task force. They shared information. They coordinated strikes. They supported each other. This level of multi-carrier coordination was difficult and required excellent communications and training. German intelligence had assumed such coordination would take Americans years to develop. Instead, they were already doing it effectively just 6 months after the Pearl Harbor attack. This indicated that American naval professionalism and institutional capability were much higher than estimated. For German naval planning, Midway was a wake-up call about the naval war in the Atlantic. If Americans could build carriers fast and use them effectively, what did that mean for the U-boat campaign? German submarines were having success against Allied convoys in 1942, but American shipbuilding was ramping up. American escort carriers were starting to appear, providing air cover for convoys. American anti-submarine tactics were improving. The window where U-boats could operate with relative freedom was closing faster than expected. German naval leadership had to accelerate its own programs and tactics to stay ahead of American countermeasures. There's also an interesting aspect about German-Japanese intelligence sharing after Midway. You'd think that after such a major battle, Germany and Japan would share detailed information about American capabilities. But the intelligence sharing between Germany and Japan was never excellent. They were allies of convenience, separated by thousands of miles, with different strategic priorities. Japan didn't want to admit the full extent of its defeat at Midway because it was embarrassing and showed vulnerability. Germany received second-hand information that likely understated the importance of Japan's damage. This meant German intelligence had to piece together what actually happened at Midway from multiple sources, including American propaganda and neutral observers. The human intelligence dimension is also worth noting. Before Midway, German intelligence relied partly on reports from agents and diplomats about American morale and capabilities. These reports had generally been pessimistic about American effectiveness. After Midway, the reports changed. Observers noted increased American confidence. War production was accelerating. The American public believed they could win. This shift in the American public mood was significant because it meant America could sustain the war effort politically. German propaganda had hoped American public opinion would turn against the war once casualties mounted. Midway showed that Americans were willing to fight and keep fighting. What about the long-term impact on German strategy? Midway happened in June 1942. By late 1942 and into 1943, American forces were landing in North Africa and then invading Sicily and Italy. German troops were discovering firsthand that American soldiers, sailors, and airmen were competent and dangerous. The pattern that emerged at Midway repeated on land. Germans initially underestimated Americans, then were shocked when Americans proved more capable than expected, and then had to adjust strategies to account for American strength. But by the time they adjusted, it was often too late. There's a broader lesson here about the danger of cultural assumptions in intelligence analysis. German intelligence made judgments about American capabilities that were colored by Nazi ideology and cultural prejudice. They wanted to believe Americans were weak because that fit their worldview. This confirmation bias led them to dismiss or downplay evidence that contradicted their assumptions. The intelligence was often there. American industrial statistics were public. American training programs were known, but German analysts interpreted this information through a lens that led to wrong conclusions. Midway shattered that lens, but the damage was already done. The comparison between German and Japanese intelligence failures is instructive. Japan underestimated America and was surprised at Midway. Germany underestimated the Soviet Union and was surprised by Moscow and Stalingrad. Both Axis powers made similar mistakes. They believed their own propaganda about enemy weakness. They failed to assess opponent capabilities realistically. They made strategic decisions based on what they wanted to be true rather than what was actually true. This recurrence is a pattern in military history. The side that sees reality clearly has an enormous advantage over the side that believes its own myths. After Midway, German intelligence tried to be more realistic about American naval power, but it didn't really matter at that point. The trajectory was set. America was building ships faster than Germany could sink them. American carriers were dominating the Pacific. American industrial might was overwhelming. By 1943, the outcome of the war was essentially determined, although it would take another 2 years of fighting to conclude. Midway was one of the turning points where the war shifted from Axis advantage to Allied advantage. And it was a turning point that German intelligence completely failed to predict. So what's the takeaway from all this? First, never underestimate your opponents based on ideology or prejudice. German intelligence let Nazi racial theories color their analysis of American capabilities. That was a catastrophic error that contributed to Germany losing the war. Second, pay attention to warning signs even if they contradict your assumptions. The Doolittle raid should have served as a wake-up call about American offensive capability. German analysts mostly ignored it. Third, industrial capacity matters enormously in modern warfare. German intelligence was aware that American factories were productive, but they didn't fully appreciate the implications for sustained military operations. Fourth, adaptability and learning speed matter more than initial advantages. Americans learned fast and adapted their tactics. That made them increasingly dangerous as the war went on. The story of German intelligence and Midway is, in essence, a tale about the consequences of getting the big picture wrong. Small tactical intelligence can be perfect, but if your strategic understanding is flawed, you make bad decisions at every level. Germany misjudged the US Navy, which contributed to its overall misjudgment of America. They thought they had years before America became a serious threat. They had months. They thought American industry would need time to gear up. It was already gearing up faster than they imagined. They thought the American fighting spirit was weak. It was strong enough to sustain a global war for 4 years. Every one of these misjudgments made German strategy worse and made Allied victory more likely. Midway was the moment when the misjudgments became undeniable. 4 carriers sinking in a single day couldn't be explained away. That was the US Navy showing the world exactly what German intelligence had gotten wrong. If this story showed you a side of World War II you hadn't thought about before, if it made you realize how crucial intelligence and accurate assessment are to military success, then hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We're bringing you the deep dives into history that reveal how wars are really won and lost, the intelligence failures and successes that shaped outcomes, and the moments when assumptions met reality. Don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching. Remember, in war and in life, seeing reality clearly beats believing comfortable lies every single time.